This is one you're going to really want to watch to the end if you watch it at all. Granted, all my videos need to be finished in order to be fully understood, but this one especially is in need of being finished all the way through. Otherwise, you're going to miss entire context that are absolutely pivotal. So it's a binary case. It's black and white. You either don't start the video or you finish it if you do start it. Your choice. But anyways, let's start it off with a simple topic. Analogs of speech. So think about it this way. We have a word or term, the present, right? The present moment. That's the term. And people will be quick to point out, okay, well, the term, quote unquote, the present moment is not the actual present moment, right? And then they'll go on to say that the actual present moment is not a word. It is not a term. It is not describable. It is ineffable because the term, quote unquote, the present moment is not this present moment. Okay, this is all well and good. This is true, but the problem is it's too true. It's too obvious. People who say this have not succeeded in saying anything special. Because, like, okay, if we're going to say that the present moment is ineffable just because it's not the word, quote unquote, present, then we could say the same thing of vegetables, right? Like, broccoli is not the word broccoli. The word broccoli is not a vegetable, right? The word vegetable is not a vegetable. So we could do this with literally anything, right? The word Ethan, the name Ethan is not Ethan. Your name is not you. There's all sorts of words that aren't things. Every word is not the thing, except for, like, there's some. I shouldn't say every. There's some, right? Like the word is a word, stuff like that. But there's all sorts of words which are not the thing in of itself. Words are pointers. They are pointers. They are fingers pointing at something. They are not meant to be the thing in of itself. So if we're going to say that the present moment is ineffable just for that fact alone, well, then we ought to go ahead and just say that everything is ineffable precisely for that fact alone, which is all fine. I mean, if we want to be mystical in that sense and just say everything is ineffable, that's all well and good. But what is with this privileging of the quote-unquote present moment, right? Okay, it's not the word present. But broccoli is not the word broccoli either. So it's all ineffable by your logic, or if you are now noticing just how obvious of a statement or a fact that is, and you want to step back and say, oh, all right, maybe we shouldn't say the present moment is ineffable, maybe we should just say it's effable, that's also fine by me. But whichever one you pick, either one is right. You can go down either path. Hell, you can go down both, right? If you want to say the present moment is ineffable and effable at the same time, all fine by me. It just depends on how you're using language. That's it. It all depends on how you're deciding to use language. But whichever one you choose, what we can say and what we will say for the purposes of this video is that the present moment is still effable precisely because we are able to use a word to point at it. So even though the word is not the actual thing, the very fact that we are able to use a word to point at the actual thing means that the actual thing is not absolutely ineffable, right? It's not ineffable in that sense. It's not ineffable in that very deep sense because we can still use a pointer for it. Likewise with broccoli. Broccoli is not ineffable in that absolute sense precisely because we can still come up with a word and point at it. And people will say, well, Ethan, we invent words. Right, we're capable of inventing words to point at broccoli and point at the present moment. That means that they are effable, not ineffable. Again, in the sense that we're talking here. They are not ineffable precisely because we can create words to point at them. So what this means is that even though the word broccoli is not actual broccoli, the word is made analogous to actual broccoli, right? It's an analog. It's a pointer, as I've said. Likewise with the word, quote unquote, present. That word is an analog. to the actual present moment. It is a word we fabricate to point at the present moment. Okay, think of all the other things that we can point at with language, all the analogs of speech that we are capable of creating. Let's look at one that I often use on this channel, the term infinity. Think of what infinity entails. I've talked about it all throughout this channel, just how boundless it is, right? It includes anything and everything, so much so that it even includes its own negation. So it's both anything and not anything. It's neither anything nor not anything, right? So it even transcends anythingness and everythingness, such that you can't even say it includes everything. That's how boundless it is. It is very non-dualistic, such that it includes its own negation. So it is both itself and not itself, and yet it is also neither itself nor not itself, and some fifth status beyond being itself, not itself, both, neither, or some sixth status, seventh status, on and on and on. If you all remember that, as I've discussed it in past videos. Yet the word infinity is finite. Look at how boundless infinity itself is, right? It's so boundless that it can be itself, not itself, both, neither, fifth thing, sixth thing, seventh, on and on and on, just boundlessly and non-dualistically. And yet the word, the analog for it, is this simple little finite word, infinity. Infinity. It's just a few syllables in there. It's a tiny, puny little word. And yet, we are capable of using it to point at this boundlessness. Right? Just like we are capable of using the word broccoli to point at broccoli, even though the word is not the actual thing in of itself. So we, here experiencing ourselves as human beings with human brains, regardless of whether I realize I have a lot of spiritual people in my audience, regardless of whether you think that there's such a thing as a human being or a human brain, we're at least having a human experience. And that's all I mean. And here in this human experience, thinking with these brains of ours, notice just how powerful of analogs or words we are able to come up with. We're able to come up with an analog for infinity. We are able to refer to it, to point at it, even with just these finite brains and even with just a finite word. Now picture things which we would not be able to point at. Things for which we would not be able to invent words for. Think about that. Before we move on to that, let's just look at all these spiritual and mystical topics which are still within the realm of analogs and terms and language. Okay, so if infinity is something we are capable of pointing at, it's something which is therefore, in a sense, effable. This also means that infinite consciousness is something that we can use a word to point at analogously. And yet infinity is far broader than infinite consciousness, because with infinity we are not committing ourselves, we are not isolating ourselves to consciousness. With infinity in a general sense, we can say, well, it's so boundless that, yeah, it includes infinite consciousness, but it also includes infinite unconsciousness, or things that are neither consciousness nor unconsciousness, etc. We can include all that stuff. Whereas with infinite consciousness, we are much more restricted because we are not including infinite unconsciousness, let alone all the other stuff. And some people will say, oh, well, infinite consciousness has infinitely imaginative power. It can just imagine unconsciousness. It can just imagine things that are neither consciousness nor unconsciousness. Okay, what I mean by infinite unconsciousness is not just some unconsciousness that infinite consciousness can imagine. No, I mean something which is so radical that infinite consciousness cannot imagine it. And people will say, well, wait, infinite consciousness is capable of imagining anything because it's infinite. So it makes no sense for there to be something that it cannot imagine. Right. Picture this. Something that can imagine anything and everything like infinite consciousness, and then something so radical that somehow it cannot be imagined by that thing which can imagine anything and everything. You say, well, Ethan, that's completely illogical. That makes no sense. If it can imagine anything and everything, then how could there be something that it cannot imagine? Right. You are noticing the nonsense. It is supposed to be nonsensical. It is supposed to be illogical. If you are closing off your mind to the possibility that there could be things too radical for even infinite consciousness to imagine, then you are closing your mind due to logic. You are saying, well, logically, if infinite consciousness is infinite such that it can imagine anything and everything, then logically there can't be anything that it cannot imagine, because that would make no sense. You're using logic. You are attached to logic. Whenever you do that, you are attached to logic. This is why I need you to stick through the whole video, because you're not going to understand where this is going if you don't. You're not going to understand the context of what I'm saying here if you don't. So yes, it makes no sense to have both be true. How can it be true that infinite consciousness can imagine anything and everything, yet also be true that there's things too radical for even it to imagine? You clearly cannot have both. That's clearly a contradiction. That's clearly illogical. Well, you're going to need to detach yourself from logic for the rest of this video. You're going to need to embrace the nonsense. You're going to need to become comfortable with contradictions, because this is just a starting line. So we look at a thing like infinite consciousness, and yet we can come up with analogs or words for things which are beyond it. Again, our words here, when we're talking about something being beyond infinite consciousness, like there being infinite unconsciousness, which is too radical for even the infinite consciousness to imagine, all these words, this entire conversation, yes, obviously it's taking place in consciousness. You're experiencing it right now in your consciousness as you're listening to me. So of course, the conversation is taking place in consciousness. The words are taking place in consciousness. The analogs are happening in consciousness. But those are the analogs. Again, remember, the word broccoli is not the broccoli itself. So just because the analogs are taking place in consciousness does not mean that what we are analogously referring to is within consciousness. No, by definition, the thing which we are analogously referring to is an infinitude of unconsciousness, which is so illogically radical that it can somehow not be imagined even by something which by definition can imagine anything and everything. That is how illogical and radical it is. And yet, we are still able to use English to point at it. We are still able to use words as fingers to refer to it. So despite all this craziness, this nonsense, this illogic, we have still not left the arena of English. And yet here's the thing, we are still well within the realm of English, even by accepting this insane contradiction. And yet there's so many spiritual teachers who tell you to not question the notion of infinite consciousness, to just treat it as if it's ultimate. Rupert Spira does this, Leo Gura does this, Peter Ralston does this, Deepak Chopra does this. Why? Why is there so much isolation there? Why are they keeping you trapped in an atom? Infinite consciousness, we can break it with something which we can still point out with English. We have not even left English, and yet we can shatter everything that they're teaching. And yet they tell you to embrace that. as the ultimate, as if you're done, that's it. This is why I made that paradox of tolerance video, a week or so ago. We need to be broader, more expansive, not so close-minded. Because see, logic is all well and good if you're doing philosophy, but it's not good if you want to do genuine mysticism. If you want to do genuine mysticism, you need to detach from logic. And let's face it, Deepak Chopra, Rupert Spira, Leo Gura, Peter Ralston, they are all still very much attached to logic. I've just shown you that they are. If they were not attached to logic, they would embrace the nonsense, but they don't. If you pose them with the possibility that maybe there's crazy things that cannot be imagined by a thing which can imagine everything, they'll say, what? What the hell is that? That makes no sense. Right, it makes no sense. And for that reason, they are closed off to it, which means they are thinking logically. They are not, by any means, detached from logic. Now, does this mean I'm placing myself above every single teacher? No, there's other teachers which I'll refer to in the future who share similar things to what I'm going to share here in this video. So I am not going to pedestal myself by any means, especially later in this video, as you'll see. Again, you need to watch this all the way through so that you can see where I'm going with this. This video is not meant to be a pedestal, but we have to start somewhere. And where we have to start is to realize just how isolated and just how constricted and just how attached all these teachings are. That infinite consciousness is nowhere close to the illogical stuff I just posed you with as possibilities, like infinite unconsciousness or things that are neither consciousness nor unconsciousness. All those contradictions are way beyond infinite consciousness, and yet even those have not shattered English. We are still able to use English to point at them. Even if we come up with some fifth thing, which is not consciousness, not unconsciousness, not both, and not neither, that is still some fifth thing we can point at. That is still not outside of English. Some sixth thing, still not outside of English. If we come up with some seventh thing, that is still not outside of English. Eighth, ninth, 10th, on infinitely. Even infinitely many things up there. It's still not outside of English. Even if we say there's beyond infinitely many of those levels, that is still not outside of English. Look how far we can go with just English. And yet they are limiting you, quote unquote, limiting you to limitless consciousness, to infinite consciousness. The term limitless and the term infinite can be used interchangeably. That's why I say they are, quote unquote, limiting you. They're not actually limiting you, because infinite consciousness is unlimited. It is not limiting, but you get what I mean. They are isolating you. They are anchoring you to infinite consciousness when, even while remaining within English, we can shatter it and transcend it and climb so much higher. Even if that makes no sense, even if that is illogical, even if infinite consciousness can already imagine anything and everything, we are still climbing higher. So detach from logic. All right, but now think about it like this. We are able to use English to refer to all the possibilities that I've posed to you so far in this video. This means that, again, with our human brains, we can come up with analogs for these things, for all these contradictions, which I've just opened you up to as possibilities. We can come up with ways to point at those things, even with the puny human brain. Okay, picture now what your worldview was like before you were born. And don't assume reincarnation or anything for the purposes of this video. I probably have many people in my audience who believe in reincarnation, but just for this video, assume a simple, ordinary, natural view of the world where you just weren't experiencing anything before your birth. Just assume that. Okay, think back to before your birth. What was your worldview? You'll probably say, well, Ethan, I wasn't around. I wasn't experiencing anything, therefore my worldview was nothing. No, it wasn't even that. Because before you were born, you did not even have a concept of nothing. Think about that. You did not even have a concept of nothing. So to say that your worldview was that you believed in nothing, no, it wasn't even that. Even to say it wasn't even nothing is still not correct because you didn't even have a concept of not even nothing. Okay, so do we say it wasn't even something that's not even nothing? No, you didn't even have a concept of not even nothing, right? So like double not even nothing. You didn't even have a concept of that. So it was less than double not even nothing. Was it therefore triple not even nothing? No, you didn't have a concept of that. Was it quadruple not even nothing? Quintuple not even nothing. Sextuple not even nothing. Septuple not even nothing. See, it goes lower and lower and lower, infinitely many levels below even nothing. And yet that entire descent, you still didn't even have a concept of that before you were born. So even to say that your worldview was infinitely many levels below nothing is entirely incorrect. It wasn't even remotely close to even that. So if we can't even really say what your worldview was before your birth, before you had a human brain, then now try and imagine what all of our analogs that we've mentioned so far would be like to you in that state. What would the notion of infinity have been like to you in that state? It would have meant nothing to you. It would have been so puny that it wouldn't have even been there. Even saying that's not good enough. Because let's say infinity is so puny that it's not even there for you. Okay, what is that vast, contradictory, illogical expanse now in which infinity is not even a thing? That entire expanse wasn't even a concept for you before you were born. So even that expanse gets collapsed to just nothing. It wasn't there. It did not matter at all to you. So infinity didn't matter to you. That vaster expanse didn't matter to you at all. Shrink that to nothing. Now there's a second, even more vast expanse. That didn't matter to you at all. So now we are climbing higher in the same way that we were descending lower before. And no matter how high we climb, it never meant anything to you before you were born. That's how crazy the analogs are when there is no human brain. So let's compare. Let's compare all the analogs we can come up with a human brain versus without a human brain. Here we sit with human brains. We are able to talk about infinity, infinite consciousness, infinite unconsciousness, things that are both consciousness and unconsciousness, things that are neither consciousness nor unconsciousness, some fifth thing, some sixth, some seventh, on and on and on, boundlessly, beyond that, just keep the ladder going and going and going. Those are all things we can use English and the human brain to point to. And yet that entire ladder, that entire boundless and beyond boundless and beyond boundless climb, that entire ladder meant nothing to you before you were born. Not even nothing to you before you were born. Double not even nothing to you. Triple not even nothing. Quadruple not even nothing. Again, the entire regress. And that leads to all the vast expanses, right? If all of that entire ladder meant nothing to you, think of the vast expanse that it would have been nothing to. And yet that vast expanse would have also been nothing to you. So think of the second, even more vast expanse now. That still would have been nothing to you. So now we have these levels going on and on and on, all these vast expanses in which the entire infinite chain means nothing to you, and then that vast expanse encompassing it means nothing to you, on and on and on and on. That is how much more, quote unquote, liberated you were when you didn't have a human brain compared to now in this human experience when you do have a human brain. So look at how much freer the analogs of a non-brain are compared to the analogs of a brain. And now think about it. A lot of teachers are trying to keep you isolated to infinite consciousness, which is one puny little analog that's capable of being pointed at by the human brain utilizing the English language. It's nowhere close to how far we can go with the human brain, let alone without the human brain. Because without the human brain, even that entire ladder of infinite consciousness, infinite unconsciousness, some third thing, fourth thing, fifth thing, on and on and on, even that entire ladder means not even nothing to you, for lack of better phrasing, because it's also not even, etc. Not even nothing to you. That's how much further you go without a human brain compared to with a human brain. And even with the human brain, you can already shatter all those teachings about infinite consciousness that are rampant throughout the spiritual community. This shows you some level of independence from every spiritual teacher. This will give you a glimpse as to where I'm going later in this video. I'm even going to use this on myself, but we have to build to that. You'll see that you have something in you which is independent from all these teachings, or at least you can find it. Okay, so we look at how far we can go with these analogs of the human brain and how much further we can go with the analogs without a human brain. So think of how quote-unquote far an unborn person can go, right? Like you before you were born, or even a dead person. Again, don't assume reincarnation for the purposes of this video. Just assume that once you're dead, you're not experiencing anything. By the way, people will say that's impossible, right? Rupert Spiro will say this, Deepak Chopra will say this. They'll say that it's impossible to just be dead. Okay, well notice, even with the simple English language, we can describe such a scenario. So if it were impossible for reality to include death, that would mean that the English language is capable of transcending reality with its analogs. Is reality really that powerless? Is it really that impotent? Could be. But again, maybe these teachings that say that that is impossible are just isolating you. They're anchoring you. They are quote-unquote limiting you. Use your brain, use its analogs to go further. But anyways, let's just say death were a thing. I'm not asking you to actually believe it is or to not believe it is. We're just using this as a tool here. But picture if actual death were a thing. Okay, you would cease to have any experience. It would be exactly as it was before you were born. You would have all the analogs which are there for you without a brain, right? Infinity would not mean anything to you. Infinite consciousness would not mean anything to you. Infinite unconsciousness would not mean anything to you. Both consciousness and unconsciousness would not mean anything to you. Things which are neither consciousness nor unconsciousness would not mean anything to you. Some fifth thing, that would not mean anything to you. Sixth, seventh, on and on and on. That entire ladder would not mean anything to you. That's what it would be like to be a dead person. Those are the analogs that would be available to you while you're dead, while you're not having an experience at all, with no brain. But you could say, even if death were real in that sense, where you were ceasing to have an experience, you know, if it were like some physicalist universe, then you would still have a body, right? There would still be a body there even though you're not experiencing it, right? The body doesn't mean anything to you, just like infinity doesn't mean anything to you, and all the other stuff doesn't mean anything to you. But we could say, you know, even though it doesn't mean anything to you, there's still a body there, if we're just assuming, again, a very ordinary physicalist worldview. Again, I'm not telling you to commit to any of these views. We're just using these as tools. But if we assume that physicalist worldview as a tool here, you would have all of those analogs available to you as a dead person with no experience. yet you would still have a body. There would still be a planet. There would still be life going on in your absence. Picture then how much more expansive the analogs would be, not just without a brain, but without a body, without a physical body, without a physical planet, without physical life, without a physical universe. Picture the analogs that would have been available to you 13.8 billion years ago before the Big Bang. So we talked about picturing the analogs that were available to you before your birth. Now I'm asking you to go even further back. Picture the analogs that would have been available to you 13.8 billion years ago before the Big Bang. So you didn't just lack a brain, you also lacked a body, you lacked a planet, you lacked an entire universe. So there was no brain, there was not even a universe. What sorts of analogs would be available to that level of non-experience? Again, think of all the analogs that were available to a dead person or an unborn person who has no experience and no brain. Now picture the analogs that would be available back 13.8 billion years ago before the Big Bang. Think about that. And yet we could go further. We could go further than that. Because now let's start layering up on our analogs. Realize that the notion of there being quote unquote something or like a nothing or a void before the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, which isn't quite correct, but the notion of there being nothing there, right? That very concept of nothing, that's something we can point at using the English language and using the human brain. So we're basically playing hopscotch here. We're basically saying, okay, we can use the human brain and we can use the English language to refer to this quote-unquote nothing that was there before the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. But now, if you were actually in that nothing, how much greater would your analogs be? Because if you were actually in that nothing, you would not have the human brain and you would not have the English language. You would not even have a universe there, limiting you to think a certain way or be a certain way. So there's us sitting here entertaining what it would be like to be in that state of nothing 13.8 billion years ago, but then there's actually being in that nothing, and if you were actually in that nothing, your analogs would be far greater. See, far greater than what we're able to entertain just sitting here, entertaining it indirectly. Now let's take this a step further. Let's take it to a second indirect level. We, with the English language, can refer to that nothing 13.8 billion years ago. And then if you were actually in that nothing 13.8 billion years ago, you'd be able to come up with even greater analogs than nothing or infinity or infinite consciousness, unconsciousness, etc. But now whatever analogs you could come up with if you were in that nothing 13.8 billion years ago, now hopscotch into them. Actually immerse yourself into them. If that were to happen, you would be able to come up with yet even greater analogs. Do you see how we're hopping from an analog into the actual thing to come up with even greater analogs, then hopping into those greater actual things, which the former analogs referred to, only to come up with even greater analogs, and then use those even greater analogs to hop into yet even greater actual things and come up with yet even greater analogs. Do you see the hopscotch we're playing here? We can have a fourth level, which we hop over to, right? So the analogs we could come up with existing in this state of nothing 13.8 billion years ago, we could hop into those actual things, which are mere analogs we're just pointing at, and then now we would be able to point at even greater analogs. Let's now hop into those actual things rather than just pointing at them, and we'll be able to point at even greater things, which we could then hop into the actual thing of. On and on and on and on. 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. We could hop infinitely many times. But infinity is an analog which we're able to come up with the human brain. So we would not just be capable of hopscotching infinitely many times from analogs to the actual things that they're referencing. We would even be capable of doing it beyond infinitely many times. And you'll say, well, Ethan, going beyond infinity doesn't make sense. That makes no logical sense. Right, detach from logic. We can refer to things which are illogical even with the human brain and with the English language. We are well beyond that by now, which means we are well beyond even the illogic of going beyond infinity. For those of you who know the topic of subsistence, you know that's much crazier than even any of this. But going back to the point here, beyond infinity, even that is something which we can refer to with the English language. So we would not just be capable of hopscotching from analogs to actual things a beyond infinite number of times. We would be capable of doing it so many times that the number of times is as great as one of those expanses for the analogs you were able to come up with without a human brain before your birth or after your death. Or even in the state of nothing 13.8 billion years ago before there was even a universe, let alone before you were born. Think of the quote-unquote numbers which we could refer to in that state. To say that they are beyond infinite would not be enough, because beyond infinity is still an analog of the human brain. It is not an analog of a non-brain or a non-universe in a state of nothing. So we could play hopscotch here so many times that it even equals one of those profoundly insane numbers, which is analogous to a non-brain or a non-universal nothing. And now we could keep layering. Let's say we were to hop through infinitely many levels. Whatever numbers those analogs come up with at that quote-unquote infinitieth level, we can now play this hopscotch so many times that it fills up one of those numbers. So on and so forth. We can keep layering and layering and layering and layering. Right? So the question here is, just how far does reality go? Just how far does existence go? Is it limited only to the analogs of the English language? Even if those analogs are limitless, right? Limitlessness is an analog of the human brain. So still, is reality quote-unquote limited to limitlessness? Limitlessness is an analog of the human brain. Is it quote-unquote limited to that even though it's not limited? Right? Even though limitlessness is unlimited, it's still an analog of the English language. And so is reality isolated to just being unlimited, or could it go further? Could it include illogical things which are beyond limitless? Those are still analogs of the English language. So even if reality did include those illogical things, it would still be stuck on English. It still would not have shattered the reach of the English language. We could still use English to transcend reality, meaning we could still use English to point to things which are further than reality, even if the English language itself is still inside of reality. Again, the words are not the things in of themselves. So just because a language takes place inside of reality does not mean that we could not use it to refer to things outside of it. But again, could we? Or does reality transcend all the analogs of the English language such that we cannot even come up with words for things which can transcend reality because reality just includes all of them? See, if reality does include all of them, then reality is not just limitless, rather it's so limitless that it also goes beyond the quote-unquote limits of limitlessness itself and includes things which are beyond limitless, or beyond that, or beyond that, or beyond that, etc. That entire ladder, that entire climb is still within the English language's reach. Reality would be so boundless that it would even break off from that. It would start to include things which transcend even the analogs of English, such as including the analogs which you would have had without a brain before your birth. You would have seen facets of reality even before you were born, even if there was no reincarnation, even if physicalism is true, such that you had no experience and no consciousness before your birth, you still would have seen analogs which are true. You still would have seen facets of reality. Think of how insane that is. You had truths even before you were born. If that's the case, if reality does include all this. And I said if it does include all of this. It may have sounded like I said doesn't, but I said does. Because if it does include all this, it includes even those analogs that were there before you were born. So at this point, there's no need for reincarnation. There's no need to be against physicalism or be against any particular view for that matter. This is another thing. A lot of spiritual teachers, they don't just teach about infinite consciousness, they rail against quote-unquote materialism or physicalism. Think about this. Everything being real is something which is an analog to the English language. We can refer to the notion of everything being real even with English. So reality, if it goes further than English and further than the human brain, it's not just going to include everything being real. It's also going to go further than that. And yet, even if we were to just isolate ourselves to everything being real, even within everything, you would have, well, literally everything being real. Materialism, physicalism, idealism, infinite consciousness, infinite unconsciousness, all of it. Infinite imagination, things which cannot be imagined even by infinite imagination or infinite consciousness, even if it is able to imagine anything and everything, right? It's going to include all those illogical things too, because it includes literally everything. It would include Christianity being the absolute truth. It would include Islam being the absolute truth. It would include materialism being the absolute truth, or infinite consciousness being the absolute truth, or none of those being the absolute truth, or all of them being the absolute truth, or all of them just being relative, partial truths, or some of them being relative and some of them being absolute truths, right? Anythingness, everything, anything and everything would be real. And yet even that notion of anythingness, that is still able to be referred to with the English language. What if reality is so boundless that it is not even bounded to the English language, and therefore not even bounded to boundlessness itself, and therefore not even bounded to the notion of everything being true? Therefore, what is the problem with materialism being true, or idealism being true, or just this being true, whatever this is? Maybe be open-minded to this just being whatever it is. Lots of spiritual teachers try to argue for a specific metaphysical view. This is philosophy. This is not genuine mysticism. Again, they are attached to logic. Logic is utilized in philosophy. It is not mystical. You see? So when they try to say, oh, reality is infinite consciousness, and all these scientists, all these materialists are closed-minded, they are pushing a specific view just as much as those scientists which they are attacking. To truly, genuinely be mystical means to be open to reality being whatever it is. It is whatever it is. Everything being true means just this can be true. And what is this? Is it a material universe? Maybe. Is it an immaterial universe? Maybe. Is it an idealist universe? Maybe. Is it consciousness? Is it just all pure consciousness? Maybe. But that is the point. Genuine mysticism does not commit you to a specific metaphysical position. And yet, for some reason, a lot of spiritual teachers are trying to commit you to a specific metaphysical position, like idealism or infinite consciousness or God consciousness, etc. None of it should matter. And a lot of them also furthermore try to say that not only should you believe their specific metaphysical position, but that their specific metaphysical position is the most advanced. They'll talk about God consciousness or alien God consciousness or alien insanity, like all these higher levels of infinite consciousness. Okay, that's great, but it's just another level of infinity. Alien God consciousness and alien insanity is just another level of infinity. What about transcending all the levels of infinity? Think about it. There can be infinitely many levels of infinity, even further beyond alien insanity. And yet you could transcend all of those infinities. Reality could transcend all of them, even all the infinitely many levels of infinity which are above alien insanity. And even that transcendence of all of the infinities, even that is still an analog in the English language. So if reality truly does not conform to English, it can go even further than that entire transcendence of all the levels of infinity, of all the infinitely many levels above alien insanity or alien God consciousness or God consciousness. And yet so many teachers are restricting you to just consciousness, to just all these infinities, to just another level of infinity, and saying, that's it, I've transcended every teacher. No, there are Zen masters and Tiantai masters and other people who practice genuine mysticism, who truly drop and transcend in the ways that I'm sharing with you here. I am not the only one. So when these teachers try to puff up their chest and say they've beaten all spiritual teachings, they're just talking about another level of infinity. They are not doing genuine mysticism. They are just doing philosophy. They are attached to logic, and they are pushing a specific metaphysical worldview. That is philosophy. That is not genuine mysticism. Genuine mysticism is about detaching from and transcending all of this. So don't get attached to some alien insanity. Don't get attached to some higher level of infinity. Whatever level of infinity is, no matter how insane or alien it is, there's a boundless number of levels above it. And yet, you could still transcend those boundless and many levels. And again, that is all still within the English analogs. You could even transcend those English analogs to non-English analogs, or non-brain analogs, non-universal analogs. Whatever analogs could be referred to in that non-universal state, you could play that hopscotch over and over and over again. Why can't reality just keep going and going and going and going? This is genuine mysticism, and I am not tolerating anything less anymore. Because again, the other stuff is too exclusive. It is too isolating. These teachers are quote-unquote limiting you. But now here's where I finally turn the gun on myself. Is that everything I've opened you up to here in this video is still 0% closer to the genuinely mystical quote-unquote nature of reality. You could move from infinite consciousness to infinite unconsciousness all the way through the analogs of English or the non-brain or the non-universal state of nothing, all the way up to what I'm sharing with you here. Think of how vast that gap is. Think of all the progress we've made, and yet even that amount of progress is 0% of the way there. That is how vast it is. We have still made 0% progress. Really not even 0% progress. Because if reality is really this quote-unquote boundless, then it's also going to include sizes of nothing which are smaller than 0. Not in the sense that they're negative numbers or negative amounts, but they have absolute values smaller than 0. So you have not even made 0% progress. Even everything I've said in this video is not even 0% closer to it, in quotes. Not even 0% closer. So despite all this egoic one-upsmanship, which I've been doing in this video, you know, like condescending on all these spiritual teachings about infinite consciousness, even all of this gets no closer. Still no closer. I have not one-upped anybody because I am no closer. You have made it no closer. Nobody has made it any closer. No matter how far you go, it'll always be 0% progress or even less than 0% progress. That is how far it goes. Nobody can ever grasp it. Nobody can ever even move closer to it. It is always inadequate. Notice how much we are dropping. And yet we could still drop lower and lower and lower. And people will say, well, if it's absolute, then talking about moving lower or moving higher or transcending, like Ethan, these are all relative concepts. Like to go lower than something is a relative concept, or to go higher than something is a relative concept. So Ethan, if it's absolute, we cannot go any lower or any higher. Again, you're using logic. Yes, of course, if something is absolute, there are no more relativities like moving lower or moving higher. But we are still doing the impossible because we are defying logic. Even if we reach the absolute and we cannot go higher, we can still go higher. Yes, that is an outright contradiction, but that is the point. We can go higher even if we cannot go higher. It's a contradiction, it's an impossibility, but we are doing the impossible. Don't let the teachers restrict you to logic. Do the impossible. Embrace the impossible nonsense. You cannot go higher than the absolute, and yet you can go higher than the absolute, even though you cannot go higher than the absolute. Keep going. Let go. Drop. More, more, more. This is what cessation points to. This is what it means to drop, to detach, to dissolve, to free, to liberate. Liberate from logic. Liberate from the analogs of English. Liberate from the analogs of a non-experience like not having a brain, or a state of nothing before the universe 13.8 billion years ago. You know, liberate yourself even from the craziness of whatever analogs could be come up with in that state. Just liberate and liberate and liberate and keep on liberating. Don't get stuck on logic. Damn your logic. Damn it to hell like it's the devil. Don't stop just because it's absolute. Keep going, even if that is illogical. And yet, no matter how much we keep going and going and going and going, we still move not even 0% closer. This is why there's the old phrase of, if you see the Buddha in the road, kill him. What that means is you finish off the teacher. You realize that despite everything I've said here in this video, everything I've opened up to you, I have still brought you no closer whatsoever. So kill me off. I'm useless. I get no closer than you or anybody else, no matter how much progress we make. So I am useless. So all these other spiritual teachings, I talk about them limiting you and restricting you, like to infinite consciousness or reincarnation or all these other things, restricting you to logic and all that, or alien God consciousness. And yet the irony is that even as unrestricted as I am still very much restricting you. I am no better than them. So I have talked down to them, I have condescended on them, but I am no better than them. So you don't just detach from them, you detach from me too. You don't just kill the Buddha, you kill all of us. I want you to kill all of us. Even more than that, you don't just kill all of us, you realize that none of us ever get any closer. So by killing all of us, you kill yourself too. You don't just kill the Buddha in the road, you don't just kill all teachers, you even kill yourself. And people will say, well, this just harks back to things like what Terence McKenna said, that no human teacher is adequate, you need to use psychedelics. No, that is still taking up another Buddha. Psychedelics are also a Buddha. Think about this, even with the English language, we can type out the sentence, there are things which are too powerful for even psychedelics to reach. Again, if reality truly transcends English, then it's got to include even things which satisfy that sentence. Think about that. It's got to include even things which are too powerful for psychedelics to reach. So no, it's not just that every human teacher is inadequate. Every teacher is inadequate, even psychedelics. Don't listen to Terence McKenna. Don't let him restrict you to another Buddha. Don't let him restrict you to psychedelics. There are things which even psychedelics come 0% closer to. So you don't just kill the Buddha in the road. You throw the psychedelics in the trash. Do I mean that literally? Do I mean you should throw out your psychedelics if you utilize them? No, I'm not making like a literal prescriptive claim here. My point is just that you can use these things to keep progressing and progressing and progressing. It's just that no matter how much progress you make, it'll always be 0%. Is this useless? Is this impractical? Yes. But this is genuine mysticism. Like I said, my work does not have any practicality to it. Liberation does not offer any practical benefits. It is simply this realization of futility, such that it is not even a realization. It's liberation, but it's not even really liberation. Because even liberation is an English analog. We have a word to point at it. So it's this quote-unquote realization of futility, where you realize that you can never claim this quote-unquote liberation. You can never claim ownership of what we're trying to reach here. You never reach it. You never get even 0% closer to it. That is genuine mysticism. So everything that every teacher shares, even psychedelics, even every crazy analog we've talked about here, you take it, you crucify it, and you rise out of it. You destroy it all. You sacrifice it all. That's what it means to be Shiva, to destroy everything. Yeah, look at everything you gain with all these analogs as you keep transcending. That's what it means to create and sustain. So it's not just being symbolically like Shiva, it's also being like Brahma and Vishnu and the Brahmin, Bhagavan, Krishna. You dissolve all of this. It's like moksha, cessation, like nirvana. Every religion points to this. And yet, even once you see what they point at, you have still made 0% progress. Even if you go from a very restricted denomination of, say, Christianity, all the way to the deeply mystical topics which we're talking about here, you still made 0% progress. That is how deeply mystical it is. You can never grasp it. You can never even get any closer to it, let alone grasp it. This is where another Zen proverb comes from, is that there is Buddha, for those who don't know him really. There is no Buddha, for those who know him really. There's never been a Buddha. There's never even been 0% progress. No one gets any closer. If no one gets any closer, then nobody ever gets there. If nobody ever gets there, then nobody is a Buddha. Even Buddhas are not Buddhas. You can be a Buddha in the sense that you can recognize all the things we're talking about here. It's just that even if you're a Buddha, you're still not a Buddha, because even Buddhas are 0% closer than non-Buddhas. So you can almost visualize a contradiction. You can see how it's literally possible to be a Buddha and understand the stuff in this video, and yet as you understand this stuff in this video, you've made 0% progress. Therefore, it's also literally true that there is no Buddha. They're both true. They're both literally true. There is no Buddha. There are Buddhas. Even everyone is a Buddha. It's a triple contradiction. Because if everything is true, well, then every truth is true, every idea is true, and therefore even a crazy person's ideas are true. Therefore, even they are a Buddha. Even the perspective of a blade of grass can be the objective truth. Therefore, even a blade of grass is the Buddha. Even every little atom in this desk is the Buddha. Because each of their perspectives are all the absolute truth too, even if they are not. So again, everything is the Buddha. Nothing is the Buddha because there are no Buddhas, yet there are Buddhas. It's just that even the Buddhas are not Buddhas. All three are true. Can you see how all three are literally true? If you can see it, you'll almost be able to visualize a contradiction, maybe for the first time in your life. And yet, even in the midst of visualizing that contradiction, you'll be no closer to it. Because nobody ever will be, even if they are. This futility is what it means to be deeply mystical. Don't restrict yourself to anything else. Don't let yourself be restricted to anything else. Don't fall for those distractions. Because they are distractions. Infinite consciousness is a spiritual distraction. God consciousness is a spiritual distraction. Alien God consciousness is a spiritual distraction. Infinite imagination, it's all spiritual distractions. Even everything I've just shared here is a spiritual distraction. To be deeply mystical and non-spiritual is to go beyond even all of this. Even me, even yourself. You let go of all of it and transcend all of it. Kill all of us. That's my message. That's everything explained.